Escape from Giant's Crown. Chapter 3. The Rut. Giant's Crown consisted of several quadrants built into the mined-out hollow body of the stone giant. As Oliff, Byron, and Dindal passed through the various quadrants and prefectures divided by railways, the mayor took great pride in elaborating on the interconnected, meticulous design of it all. It was clear that he'd been an integral part of its development over the years. If he'd not been the sole architect of the great city, he certainly wanted Oliff to believe that he was. The upper back of the hunched-over giant was known as the dredge, and it was used mostly for trade and shipping, housing a few hotels and other dwellings. But the factories and billowing smokestacks made it barely livable. The different structures were set upon scaffolding sometimes outstretched from the upper torso to create a series of docks which hung out over the storm clouds below. The dredge was also where most manufacturing and mining operations were carried out, as they were conveniently located adjacent to each other. The belly was known as the jar, probably because it's where most minerals were excavated. Of course, far below all of that activity, other more wretched souls rotted away in the crack. Oliff did not pry for more information beyond what Dindal had told him about the crack. He contented himself with the determination not to upset any of the wrong people. The legs, however, lacked any special labeling. They were simply known as the legs, and act as a barrier that kept the riffraff out of the city, as Byron would say. No doubt referring to the hobos of the toe, Oliff thought. Among the many elaborate factories and roads lined with street lamps, railway cars rattled about in a hasty manner which made Oliff queasy. He was accustomed to a far slower pace of life, having lived for 35 years on the farm outside of Tuksa, and he had only ever heard fairy tales of such things as motor carriages and flying machines, tales that his father had told him from a time long before he'd been born. Even as a child, he'd thought of them as something impossible. As their cart traveled through the city, Oliff watched out the window. Here he saw more people in one place than he thought existed in the entire land of Speria. In their haste, they shoved past one another as if everyone else in town were merely an obstacle in each other's path. The rail car shuttled them through subway caverns and over the cobblestone streets into a cavern. Oliff shielded his eyes from the light as it pulled out of the ear and parked in the station behind the giant's head. Most anyone who had any money at all lived in the rut, but looking around, you wouldn't have known it. In fact, though Byron spoke of the city as a treasure, every street lamp and building remained in quite a worn state of disrepair. The misshapen wooden peaks of the structures wrapped around the massive circular dome in the shape of a broken crown. Oliff wondered if this was what had given the city its name. It was a crown, but it was a broken one. High above it all, the giant held in its hands the root of a great fruit tree. Its trunk and branches dangled out far above them, and golden peaches illuminated the underside of the canopy even in the daylight. From miles away you could see them glistening, enormous and bright. It was a beacon of desire to everyone in Speria, and a constant reminder. It was a symbol both hopeful and dire. A symbol that reminded everyone that did not live in the peaches that they were insignificant, and it was just out of reach, inaccessible to anyone except those who lived there. Peachers, Byron and Dindal called the people who lived in the glorious palaces of fruit, and the way that he said it made them seem like they were gods. After all, they were the true rulers of the city and possessed everything that everyone else wanted. If the city had any wealth at all, it was really entirely in the peaches. The peachers were both despised and admired by all whom they ruled. Motivated by greed and jealousy, it was this desire to become a peacher which fueled the very gears that kept the machines churning and the shipyards rotating and the coal burning. Even Byron and Dindal were not immune to its alluring luster. They stared longingly up at those peaches each time they spoke of them. While the peachers in the tree threw lavish parties high above them, the rest of the city struggled for survival. Down on the back of the giant, every third building on any given avenue had partially collapsed into the streets. Rain-soaked wooden planks buckled into a kind of a moist, ashen mud. The remaining rubble and debris had been pushed aside as to not slow traffic. Even the food tasted like dirt. So it was no surprise that for the people stuck in the rut and the dredge, becoming a peacher wasn't a mere goal. It was the sole purpose of life itself. Any one of them would do just about anything to get up out of the muck and into the peaches, if only for a brief moment in the light. If you had to scam or scheme or steal to do it, no one would bat an eye. In fact, it was expected. You might even gain some respect in the process. Keep a wary eye out, Oliff told himself. It was a mystery to him how neighbors of the same city could be so quick to turn on each other, and yet their little ecosystem somehow remained intact. Perhaps it was the peach pins themselves which created the structured hierarchy society needed to function. People adored those pins. The only honest way to gain entry into the peachy life was to acquire a total of 5 of those little trinkets. How does one earn such a lofty gift? only by exemplary acts of patriotism or heroism, awarded by none other than Mayor Byron himself. The irony of the situation, one that no one missed, was Byron himself was not a peacher. "Oh, but this is the sacrifice I must make," he'd say, "for the city which I love more than life itself." "But what of the women and children?" Oliff asked. He wondered how someone could possibly raise a family under such an unscrupulous system. "Oh, the whammons," Dindal repeated with a bashful giggle. No woman had set foot in Giant's Crown since anyone could remember. Only peachers were allowed to marry or to have children, so the entire city consisted only of men, most of whom refused to grow beyond their primal desires. Rumors of a woman's mere appearance sparked legends. In fact, some businesses were built upon the very taboo notion of such a creature. The most opulent buildings in town housed lavish galleries which charged incredibly high prices just to view closed-door paintings of the fairer sex. After a bit of prying from Mayor Byron, Dindal shyly confessed that he'd once paid upward of 50 penny just to get a glimpse of the famous painting of a nipple, titled Luminous Knob. He described it in great detail, but upon hearing it, Oliff wondered if poor Dindal hadn't been swindled. After all, if none of them had ever actually seen a nipple, how could they know they were looking at an authentic painting of one? The three of them exited the final railway station and passed through the bustling traffic circle in the center of the rut, where dozens of motor carriages swerved around them. As the evening light waned, lampposts lit up the streets bathed in a misty drizzle. In the center of the traffic circle stood a statue that looked as though its head had been smashed and reattached often. Slabs of discarded concrete face pieces lay scattered around its base. The statue's resemblance to the mayor was undeniable. Oliff looked between Byron and the stone statue. "Seems like you're a popular guy around here." "Well, not everyone appreciates an act of selflessness, my good man. Nor do some people understand the benefits of loyalty." He threw one arm around Oliff and with the other gestured to Dindal to have the mess cleaned up. "But you're different," he told Oliff with a smirk. "I could tell immediately. You're someone I can count on." He punctuated his words with a firm pat on the back. "What are we even doing, Mayor? Why are you showing me all of this?" Oliff asked as Byron led him down a long row of houses to the front of a worn-down 3-story home. "Chewing?" Byron chuckled. "Why, I merely want to give you the grand tour of your new home. You'll certainly need to know your route at least." "My route?" "You'll need to know your way around if you're going to do this job," Byron said as he stood on the doorstep rocking back and forth on his heels. He gestured for Oliff to ring the doorbell. What do you want me to do?" Oliff asked. Byron cracked a wolfish grin and gave Oliff's brawny shoulder a squeeze. "Well, hopefully we won't need you to do anything at all. Just stand there and look." He chopped the end of his cigar, lit it, and gave it a puff. "Intimidating." With a wink, he slid his cigar back between his golden teeth and pressed the doorbell himself. Oliff shrugged and looked to Dindal for any kind of clarification, but the lackey only waddled up to the door. "Just stand there and, look scary, big fella. We'll do all the talking." Several latches unchained from the other side of the door, and a spindly man with long eyebrows peeked through the slit. Byron immediately lodged the pointed metal end of his shoe into the opening, twisted it to pry the lock off the rail, swung the door fully ajar, and stepped into the man's home. "Mr. Dugan," he boomed, pushing his chest out and perusing the room. Byron, I mean Mr. Mayor Byron, sir." Dugan nervously backed away, chattering his words. He was obviously terrified and immediately covered the 3 pins on his chest, gripping them tightly. "Oh, don't be so stuffy about it," Byron said. "You're too shiny for that." Dugan backed into a cabinet, nearly collapsing its contents. I don't have it." Byron's gaze pierced through him. "Don't have it?" "I don't have any money yet, that is to say. I will. I just need another week, if you please, sir." Byron sucked in his cigar and released a stream of smoke. "Not so shiny, after all, then, I suppose." Dugan blanched. "Muscles." Byron snapped his fingers over his shoulder. "Check his pockets." "What's that?" "Check his..." Oliff put his finger behind his earlobe curiously. Byron leaned into Oliff's face, his beady eyes ignited with fury. "Pockets, you cantankerous pea-brain! Check his bloody pockets!" Dugan interrupted. "No need for that. You won't find anything. I don't have anything to find." "Not going to pay? Well, but you'll take a pin or two, won't you?" Byron said, poking the filthy end of his cane into Dugan's chest. His eyes filled with tears. Dugan trembled as he clutched his precious pins. Oliff wondered again if this was a scene of yet another tableau, organized for his benefit, another chance for the mayor to show off his power and influence. "We got a word for folks who take stuff and don't pay." Dindal waddled into the doorway. "And a place as well." No, not the crack!" Dugan fell to his knees, pleading, sniffling into Byron's sleeve. "Oh, don't be so dramatic." Byron tipped the ash from his cigar onto the old man's head. "You're no good to anyone locked up in the crack." He yanked his arm from the man's grasp. "All right, then," he told Oliff. "Muscles! Take his pins." Oliff stood stunned. "Mayor, really?" "Oh, you're right," Mayor Byron said. "That won't be enough, will it? And while you're at it, why don't you rough him up a little bit?" Oliff's mouth fell wide open. Was this the job that he'd agreed to do? "Well, go on, then." But Oliff didn't react. He wasn't about to beat up this poor guy for no reason at all. There must be some mistake. "Do I look like I'm asking?" Directing his anger at Oliff, Byron pressed in closer, as if looking for something in his face. Perhaps he liked backing people into a corner and watching them squirm, to see their desperation and loss of any dignity they may have left. The fire in his eyes was all the warning Oliff needed. "This is the job. You work for me now. You came to me. You needed me. Your boy needs me. And you know what? I bloody well delivered. Now it's your turn." Byron slipped a pair of brass knuckles into Oliff's hands and closed them around it. "Or have you forgotten the details of our agreement?" he growled. Oliff stared at the floor. He'd gotten the message loud and clear. He'd never been a fighter, a thug, or a gangster. He wasn't like the city folk of Giant's Crown. He cared little for gold or power. He was just a simple farmer, a father, a strong but gentle soul. Yet there were no two ways about it. If he did not perform the job asked of him, Ma would die. Byron would make certain that they were cast out of the city, or worse yet, tossed into the crack. Either way, they'd be left to rot. All his life he'd been a farmer, but today that would need to change. Today he'd need to become whatever he had to in order to keep his boy alive. "Just one more day," he muttered as he slipped on the brass knuckles. Then Oliff closed the door behind the mayor and Dindal so that others outside could not see what he was about to do. He looked back at Dugan, who sat in a puddle of his own urine against the wall, then made a fist. "I'm really very sorry about all of this, Mr. Dugan," he said.